Hello, my name is Layla, and 5 months of my life, every spreadsheet, every late night draft, every working weekend, was quietly stolen by my own sister. She called me dead weight behind my back, presented my project as hers, removed my name from every file, every slide. The worst part? No one noticed. Not my boss, not our parents, not even the people I worked with side by side. They all looked at her and saw brilliance. They looked at me and looked away. Until one morning, in front of the entire company, I stood up with nothing but a blank folder and 2 words: good luck. And what happened next is why you're still listening. What would you do if the person who betrayed you shared your blood and still smiled like nothing happened? Rain drummed steadily against the windows as I stepped into the conference room that morning. Everything outside was gray and damp, Seattle's usual March mood. Inside, the LED lights cast an even colder tone across the long glass table. I walked in early, as always, and took a seat near the far end. I liked the quiet. I liked preparing in silence. I pulled my laptop from my bag and opened the slide deck. Every slide had been polished to perfection the night before. I'd checked the transitions, color contrasts, even the position of the company logo. It was the culmination of nearly 5 months of late nights and quiet weekends, hours my colleagues never saw. I wasn't there to impress. I was there to deliver. But even then, I knew deep down, it wouldn't matter. People began to filter in, chatting softly, settling into their spots. Some offered nods in my direction. A few smiled. No one sat near me. It wasn't personal. It never was. I was just there. And then she arrived. Isolde breezed in like she always did, heels clacking with each confident step, phone in hand, Starbucks cup in the other. Her navy blazer hugged her frame just right, and her hair, as always, was effortlessly pinned back like she hadn't even tried. Except I knew better. Isolde didn't do anything without purpose. She didn't look at me when she entered. She didn't need to. Everyone else straightened up a little when she walked in. She moved like someone who had already won. And in most rooms like this one, she usually had. "Good morning, everyone," she said brightly, placing her cup on the head of the table. "Let's dive in. We've got exciting progress on the pilot project." I didn't say a word. The projector flickered to life as she connected her laptop. The title slide appeared. My title slide. Same font, same theme, same structure, except it had her name at the bottom. "This pilot," she began, "was developed under my direction. Layla," her voice paused ever so slightly, "helped coordinate some logistics." Some logistics. That was it. 5 months of planning, data cleaning, late-night modeling, vendor calls, timeline corrections, reduced to some logistics. I felt my stomach drop. I didn't speak. I didn't even blink. But something inside me shifted. No one corrected her. Not a single person in that room paused or questioned it. They nodded along, flipping through printed handouts I hadn't seen before. I wondered how many of my notes she had copied over. The meeting rolled forward like clockwork. Charts, projections, performance indexes. Her voice was smooth, practiced, polished, using my words in her cadence. I watched the scene unfold like a movie I'd already seen but couldn't skip. When it ended, people clapped. The VP smiled and told her, "Good work, Isolde." She gave a small, humble smile. "Just doing my part." As the others trickled out, I gathered my things slowly. I didn't trust my face. My hands moved steadily, but my pulse was high. I needed air. I needed space. I stepped into the hallway, heading for the elevator. That's when I heard her voice again. I paused, instinct more than anything, and listened. She stood near the coffee station with one of the senior managers, laughing softly. "Honestly," she said, sipping her latte, "Layla's a sweet girl, but she's a bit of dead weight sometimes." There was a pause. "She means well, of course," she added with a grin, "but you know how it is. Some people just follow better than they lead." The words were delivered so casually, so effortlessly, it took me a moment to register their weight. Dead weight. I froze, eyes locked on the elevator door ahead of me. I could see her reflection faintly in the polished steel, standing there, latte in hand, my project in her mouth, and now this. I didn't move. I didn't speak. Something in me hardened, not out of anger, not yet, but realization. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was personal, intentional. The elevator arrived. I didn't step in. Instead, I turned and walked back to my desk. I sat down slowly, the screensaver glowing on my monitor. The spreadsheets were still open, the ones I had built, line by line, formula by formula. I stared at the blinking cursor, my fingers hovering over the share button on the company server. I could have sent it all out. The clean version, the one with my watermark and timestamps. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I minimized the window and opened a new folder. I named it Contingency Plan, Phase 1. Then I opened a blank document and typed 4 words at the top. She doesn't know yet. I saved the file and leaned back in my chair. I didn't reply. I didn't scream. I just started planning. I didn't sleep that Friday night. The clock by my bed blinked past 2, then 3, and still my eyes stayed open. Not from rage, not even pain. What I felt was colder than that. Something like a quiet detachment, like I was watching my own life from the other side of a one-way mirror. Saturday afternoon passed in a blur. I went to the store, picked up a fruit tart, the one from the refrigerated shelf that looked decent enough to pass for homemade, and tried to convince myself this dinner didn't matter. It was just a routine meal, just a few hours with my parents and Isolde. Nothing would happen, nothing would change. By 6:30, I was pulling into the familiar driveway. The lights inside were already on, casting soft yellow glows through the curtains. I stepped out, tart in hand, and took a long breath before walking up to the door. Mom greeted me with her usual warmth, kissing my cheek like she hadn't seen me in years. "Oh, honey, I didn't know you'd make it tonight," she said, already turning toward the kitchen. She hadn't noticed the dessert. "I always come to Saturday dinner," I replied gently, setting the box on the counter. "Oh, right," she mumbled, moving a pan off the stove. "It's just that Isolde said you've been swamped lately. She mentioned you were overwhelmed." I didn't answer. I just washed my hands and found my usual seat, at the corner of the table, right next to the pantry door. The same spot I'd occupied since high school. Isolde arrived 5 minutes later, loud and shining like a brand new pendant in a Tiffany box. She kissed Mom on the cheek, ruffled Dad's hair like he was her old college buddy, and gave me a quick cursory glance before placing her purse on the bench. "Well, look at us," she said, unfolding her napkin. "The whole family, just like old times." Dad chuckled softly, eyes never leaving his newspaper. We passed dishes, made small talk about spring traffic, tulip season, and how Mom's friend Linda got scammed by someone pretending to be her grandson. It was almost comfortable, until the conversation drifted toward work. "So," Mom said brightly, "Isolde, your dad tells me that project you're heading is a big deal now?" Isolde smiled, modest and practiced. "Oh, the logistics pilot? Yeah, it's gaining traction. Took months of groundwork, a lot of long nights. You know how it is. But I finally got it to where it needs to be." She took a sip of water, then added, "Thankfully, I had the right team to execute my vision, though some parts required more caring than others." Her eyes didn't shift. She didn't have to look at me for everyone to know what she meant. I blinked. Not slowly, just once. Mom chuckled like it was a compliment. "Well, you've always been the leader, sweetie, ever since you were bossing your sister around with those lemonade stands." I didn't speak. I felt my throat tighten, but not from tears. It was that familiar feeling, like I was disappearing in real time. Dad glanced up briefly, then back at his paper. I placed my fork down carefully, trying not to let the metal click too loud on the ceramic. After dinner, I retreated to the bathroom. The light flickered once before settling into its dull yellow glow. I sat on the closed toilet lid and pulled out my phone. A new internal memo had dropped. Final draft of the pilot report. I opened it. Lead author, Isolde C. Contributors, blank. No mention of my name. Not in the footnotes, not in the acknowledgements, not even a reference to data support. It was like I had never existed in that room, in those spreadsheets, in the all-nighters I pulled just to make her look good. I took a screenshot, then another, then downloaded the PDF and sent it to myself. I saved the file under a new folder. Confirmations. When I came out of the bathroom, Isolde was laughing with Dad about something to do with golf. Mom was already clearing dishes. No one noticed my absence. Or maybe they did, and chose not to say a word. I'm heading out, I said. Mom turned, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Already? I've got a few things to wrap up tonight, I answered. Isolde tilted her head. Still trying to catch up? She asked, a little too sweet. You know, sometimes it's okay to admit when you're out of your depth. My jaw didn't move. Thanks for the advice. Outside, the night had turned damp and breezy. I slid into the driver's seat and let the radio play softly as I pulled away from the curb. The windshield wipers cut across the glass in rhythmic swipes, but the noise did nothing to clear my head. The highway was mostly empty. My thoughts were not. This wasn't just about being overlooked anymore. This was a rewrite, a deliberate deletion. Isolde hadn't just taken the spotlight. She'd erased the proof I was ever even there. I turned off the music. This isn't just about credit, I whispered to the empty car. This is about erasure. My hands tightened around the wheel. At a red light, I opened the voice memos app on my phone, hit record, and spoke just one word into the silence. Phase 2. The weekend passed like wet cement, slow and weighty, dragging behind me no matter how many errands I ran or closets I reorganized. By Sunday night, I'd made a detailed list of backup files to recover first thing Monday. I even laid out my blazer. I wanted to look composed, calm, not like someone who'd been pushed out of her own story. That Monday morning, the lobby at work smelled like burnt coffee and floor wax. Same as always. I nodded at the security guard, flashed my badge, and stepped into the elevator with 3 other employees making small talk about the weather. I didn't say anything. I was too focused on what I needed to confirm. By 8:03, I was at my desk. The hallway still buzzed with that early energy, clicks of heels, hums of microwaves reheating breakfast, fingers tapping on phones. I opened my laptop and sipped my coffee, ready to dive into the pilot project dashboard, the one I had built from the ground up. But when I clicked the shared folder icon, a message popped up. Access denied. I paused, stared at the screen, then refreshed. Still the same message. I opened a different document, my old draft of the timeline, and that opened just fine. But when I went back to the pilot project repository, I was locked out again. I checked the file path. It was the same one I'd used for months. Same server, same group. My permissions had been removed. On a Monday morning, without notice. At first, I told myself it was a mistake. It had to be. Maybe someone in IT had changed group access. Maybe a reset had triggered. I even smiled to myself, too tightly, and walked down the hall. IT was 3 doors down, past the break room. I found Greg at his desk, halfway through a protein bar, staring at 2 monitors filled with code and charts. Morning, I said lightly, trying not to sound too pointed. Hey, quick thing. I think I'm locked out of the pilot project files. Could be nothing, but would you mind checking? Greg gave me that polite tech guy shrug and typed something on his keyboard. Username? I gave it. He tapped for a few seconds, squinted, then turned slightly toward me. His tone changed. Huh. Yeah. Looks like your access was revoked Friday evening. Around 5:37 p.m., request came from Strategy. I didn't flinch, but inside, something in me went very still. Strategy department? I echoed. He nodded. Yup. Request was tagged to a senior account. No notes, just a roll removal. I thanked him, turned, and walked out without a word. Not too fast, not too slow, just enough to keep the rhythm of someone who didn't want anyone to see the flicker in her chest. Back at my desk, I sat down, hands in my lap. I looked around. Everyone else was working like nothing had happened, because for them, nothing had. My team hadn't noticed. Why would they? To them, I was still helping. A ping sounded on my monitor. Calendar invite. Quarterly review, hosted by Isolde C. And there it was. The transfer was official. I clicked into the invite, checked the attendee list. Executives, team leads, department heads, and me. Still on the list. Still invited to the performance of a project I'd created, but apparently no longer owned. No explanation, no handover, no decency. I closed the window. I didn't cry. I didn't feel rage either, not the kind that explodes. What I felt was exact, like a thread finally pulled loose after being sewn too tight for too long. I opened a new folder on my desktop. Named it Reclamation Archive. Then I got to work. First, the raw data timelines, every export from the first week we started testing. Then the project scoping doc with my initial notes. I pulled audio memos from my phone, voice logs I'd made late at night to track model inconsistencies. I even found a napkin sketch I'd taken a picture of during one of our earlier brainstorms, before Isolde ever showed interest. Each item went into the folder. I labeled them with dates, specific tags, and descriptions. No vague labels, nothing ambiguous. I wasn't compiling a defense. I was preparing a record, something undeniable, something that would speak louder than I ever could in a meeting room full of practiced smiles. By mid-afternoon, I had enough material to tell the entire story of the project, beginning to end, without a single word from anyone else. I loaded it all onto an encrypted external drive and slipped it into the inside pocket of my bag. That evening, while most of the office was chatting near the elevators about dinner reservations, I stayed at my desk. Final check. File integrity. Format consistency. No loose ends. When I finally shut my laptop, the room had thinned out. I stood, smoothed my blazer, and zipped my bag slowly. They thought they could remove me. They thought that pulling access would erase me. But I built the blueprint. By the time I reached my car, the sun had already started to dip behind the buildings. Monday evenings in Seattle had a particular kind of melancholy, just gray enough to feel like the weekend had never happened, but not quite dark enough to forget the office lights. I drove home with the radio low, fingers tapping the steering wheel in rhythm with a jazz station I didn't normally listen to. I didn't go straight into the house. I sat in the driveway for a moment, letting the engine run. My bag was heavier than usual, though the only thing added was a single USB drive tucked between a snack wrapper and my backup phone charger. I looked at the porch light, thought of all the evenings I'd come home bone-tired from running that project, while Isolde had floated around doing stakeholder management. I walked in quietly, dropped my bag on the chair near the window, and turned on just the lamp in the corner. Then I kicked off my shoes, rolled up my sleeves, and pulled out my laptop. It was time. Earlier that day, the department had its weekly sync. Everyone was there. Well, everyone that mattered. Isolde had volunteered to present progress on the pilot. "Thought I'd walk us through where we are," she'd said, eyes sweeping the room like she was bestowing a gift. I'd taken a seat in the back, near the coffee urn. Not because I didn't want to be seen, but because I needed to observe. Every eye flicker, every reaction, every word. The deck she opened looked awfully familiar. Same layout, same slide order. I recognized the color palette because I'd customized it to match our brand colors and accessibility standards. Even the phrasing, optimizing vendor communication through real-time data adjustment, was straight from a memo I wrote at 1:42 a.m. 6 weeks ago. And there it was, out of her mouth. My sentence, my rhythm, my voice. She didn't even blink as she said it. I looked around the room. Nobody flinched. No one turned to look at me. Of course they didn't. To them, it sounded natural coming from her. She spoke with that crisp, performative clarity people mistake for leadership. The words were mine, but the delivery? All Isolde. Then, in the middle of explaining a performance slide, she paused. It wasn't long, barely half a second, but her eyes flicked toward me. Just a flash. I met her gaze. I didn't smile, I didn't scowl. I just held her there. And she looked away first. Back at home now, I opened a fresh document. No templates, no formatting, just a blank screen. I started listing every asset tied to the project, version dates, authorship tags, internal approval trails. Then I opened a folder from 3 months ago, voice memos I'd recorded while testing data filters. I copied them into a new folder. I dug out a stack of Post-it notes from my kitchen drawer. Lined them up on the coffee table, each with a category: planning, drafts, client feedback, data testing, final edits. I began laying everything out like pieces to a puzzle, except I already knew what the picture was. I just needed to show them I'd drawn it first. It was almost midnight when I pulled out the external drive. Sleek, black, no label. I transferred everything into a master folder and named it Proof LC Archive. But then I opened another blank folder and titled it simply Good Luck. That one? It stayed empty. I stared at it for a while, then dragged it into the shared drive where Isolde had been uploading presentation files. I didn't delete anything. I didn't sabotage. I just gave her an early gift, one I knew she'd open too late. The truth is, I didn't want revenge. I wanted restoration. I wanted my work back in my own voice, not piped through hers like some stage script she never helped write. Some people yell when they've been wronged, others retreat. Me? I build timelines. I archive evidence. I wait for the right stage and the right light. I clicked save, leaned back on the couch, and looked at the quiet apartment around me. She could have had my help. She chose to steal instead. She wanted the spotlight. I was building the fuse. The morning air felt unusually crisp for mid-April. I opened the office door with one hand, balancing my coffee in the other. A familiar ding echoed as I passed the front desk. I didn't bother making small talk. I went straight to my corner desk, powered on my machine, and settled into the quiet routine that had once been my comfort, and now, my cover. Just as I began checking the system logs from the shared folder, my phone buzzed. I picked it up without much thought, expecting some internal notification. What I saw made my breath stop. A message. From Isolde. The little deadweight doesn't even know what's coming. This is going to be perfect. No context. No greeting. Just that. It took a second to register. The message wasn't meant for me. I stared at it for longer than I care to admit. The words weren't sharp. They were surgical, precise. I could see her smirking while she typed it, confident that she was in control of the narrative, that I was still asleep at the wheel. I didn't reply. I didn't show it to anyone. I simply whispered, "Good." Because the moment I read it, something inside clicked into alignment. That afternoon, when most of the team had left for their late lunch, I pulled up the project's shared folder directory. I kept my screen turned slightly away from the hallway, just in case. The archive I had compiled the week before, complete, detailed, time-stamped, was safe, stored offline, encrypted 3 ways. Untouchable. But the copy sitting in our central drive, the one Isolde had been presenting from, was something else entirely. Click by click, I removed every substantial file, every chart, every documented model test, every narrative brief. Gone. In their place, I uploaded a single PowerPoint, 36 slides, all blank. No title, no graphs, just one final slide with bold black text centered in the middle. Good luck. I named the folder exactly that. I checked the upload timestamp, then I cross-checked the permissions, just enough access for her to think nothing had changed. The trap was simple, clean, and silent. Afterward, I emptied my browser cache, closed everything, and stood from my desk with a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. That evening, back home, I changed into my comfiest sweatshirt, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat at the kitchen table with my notebook open. On the first page, I wrote, "You do not need to yell. Let the silence be your sword." Then I flipped the page and listed the date of the final stakeholder presentation. 1 week from today. I practiced my opening line in my head. Then again aloud. Soft, steady, deliberate. By the time I was halfway through the second glass of wine, I had run through the entire delivery twice. Not just the words. My breath, my stance, my tempo. I knew every place she would stumble. I knew every number she had memorized without context, every model she hadn't actually tested. I didn't need to raise my voice. The data would speak. The evidence would breathe for me. Before bed, I packed my work bag with precision. One fresh USB, my backup drive, a physical copy of the project report, printed, bound, time-stamped, and my blazer, pressed and waiting by the door. It wasn't arrogance. It was preparation. She was still playing a game of image. I was playing chess. The next morning, as I logged into my computer, a new meeting request popped up. I didn't have to read the whole thing to know what it was. The subject line said it all. Final stakeholder presentation, hosted by Strategy Department. I scanned the invite. All department heads would be there. Leadership, budget holders, people who had the power to decide what moved forward and who got left behind. I scrolled to the bottom of the recipient list. Isolde was listed as presenter. My name was nowhere. But it didn't matter. I clicked accept without hesitation. I didn't threaten her. I didn't even warn her. But I did leave her one message. When I arrived that morning, the building was unusually quiet for a presentation day. The kind of stillness that tells you something big is coming, but nobody's ready to talk about it. I walked past reception, nodded at the security guard, and took the elevator up without a word. On the ride to the 14th floor, I could feel the weight in my bag. USB drive, backup folder, handwritten cue cards. Like armor I'd spent months forging. I stepped into the executive conference room 20 minutes before showtime. The long table gleamed under overhead lights, chairs perfectly aligned, water glasses half filled as if someone had measured them. I chose a seat in the back corner, close enough to see the screen clearly, but far enough to watch the room unfold. The VP arrived first, greeting no one. He reviewed his notes with the intensity of someone grading a final exam. Then came the finance director, 2 supply chain leads, and the head of compliance. All of them quietly settled in, exchanging nods, but skipping the usual chit-chat. They knew today mattered. At 10:01 a.m., Isolde swept in. Hair sleek, blazer sharp, lips tinted like someone ready for a magazine shoot. She looked like she owned the air she breathed. And judging by the way some of the men straightened in their seats, she knew it. She didn't look at me, not once. "Good morning," she said brightly, plugging in her laptop. "Thanks for being here. I know your time is valuable, so let's jump in." The projector screen flickered as she clicked the remote. Then it stayed blank. She clicked again. Still nothing. She gave a tight smile and tapped a few keys. "Sorry, folks. Must be a brightness issue. These HDMI connections have minds of their own." No one laughed. A couple of people shifted in their chairs. She unplugged and replugged the cable. Clicked again. Nothing. The VP leaned back, fingers laced. "Should we give it a moment or—" Isolde chuckled softly. "Just a hiccup, 1 second." Another click, still blank. "Maybe the file didn't transfer properly," she said, her voice higher now. "Let me try from the cloud backup." The screen remained empty. And that's when I stood up. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. I rose like I was stretching after sitting too long. I reached into my bag, pulled out my drive, and walked slowly to the front of the room. Isolde froze. Her hand hovered over the trackpad. "I can help," I said evenly. "Would you like me to present the full version?" She blinked. A moment passed. Another. The room fell into complete silence. I didn't wait for her answer. I walked past her, calm and direct, unplugged her laptop, and plugged in my own. The screen lit up instantly. Title slide in crisp font. Company logo placed perfectly in the corner. AI-driven logistics pilot initiative, prepared by Layla C. No one said a word. The next slide appeared. Performance benchmarks, side-by-side comparisons, and my original model structure. Everything Isolde couldn't explain if she tried. I turned to face them all. VP, directors, legal, finance. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. Let's begin, I said. The first few minutes passed with only the hum of the projector and the occasional scribble of a pen. The room transformed as each slide advanced. Graphs, timelines, real-time process improvements, all supported by datasets no one else had touched. I explained how we modeled warehouse routes using AI-powered simulations, how we reduced delays by nearly 40% during peak season, how we flagged vendor miscommunication 2 weeks before the holiday crunch. At one point, someone asked a question about how we verified our historical data. I clicked into a hidden slide and showed the log history with full audit trails, timestamps, user access, data pulls, all under my name. And still, I never raised my voice. I didn't gloat. I let the facts work like gravity, steady, undeniable. Toward the end, I noticed her beside me. Isolde hadn't moved. Her jaw was tight. Her hands rested at her sides, fingers curling slightly, like they were trying to hold on to something that was already slipping away. When I reached the final slide, I paused. The room was still. This project wasn't just about logistics, I said, eyes on the table. It was about building something solid, something that lasts even when the credits get shuffled. No one replied. But they didn't need to. The VP stood first. "Thank you, Layla," he said, his voice steady. "That was very thorough." A few others nodded. Someone whispered, "Impressive." I closed my laptop gently and unplugged the drive. The moment didn't need fireworks. It needed silence. And the first slide had spoken louder than I ever needed to. I hadn't even taken 2 steps away from the projector before a hand shot up near the end of the table. It was Graham Park, Director of Operations. Sharp suit, slower voice, the kind of man who lets silence do half his work for him. "I noticed the efficiency chart you shared earlier shows a 9% variance from what we received last Friday," he said, his tone even. "Can you explain the discrepancy?" I didn't flinch. "Of course," I replied, clicking back to the chart. The version submitted Friday evening was altered. The figures shown today are from the original model output, verified against internal logs and confirmed by testing reports. I can share the file access trail if you'd like. A few people exchanged glances. Graham leaned forward. "Altered by whom?" I glanced toward Isolde, still standing at the edge of the screen, arms rigid at her sides. "The edit trail points to a strategy department upload," I said, voice calm. "Timestamped. Friday, 6:12 p.m. There was a short rustle of murmurs around the room. I watched their expressions shift. Not shock, but recognition. Like puzzle pieces clicking into place, they hadn't realized were scattered. Another hand went up. This time it was from Marisol, a VP from finance, who rarely spoke unless it was critical. "I just want clarity here," she said. "Who submitted the final presentation file for today?" Isolde cleared her throat. "That would be me," she said quickly. "But there may have been a file sync issue. Sometimes when we transfer—" "Did you personally write the updated performance sections?" Marisol interrupted, gently but firmly. There was a pause. Isolde blinked. "I compiled it from the team's shared documents. I was under the impression—" "Did you write the machine learning script?" someone else asked from the far side of the room. It was Leon, lead engineer, whose only loyalty was clean code. Isolde's jaw tightened. The final model was a collaborative effort. "It was written in Python 3.8, I said evenly, with integrated calls to our legacy system using a hybrid transformer-based model. I can share the Git commit logs and script files right now if needed. I reached into my bag, pulled out a second USB, and held it up. The VP, who had remained quiet, finally leaned forward. He steepled his fingers, gaze flicking between us. "I believe we're seeing two very different pictures here," he said slowly. The air in the room changed. It wasn't loud. It was sharper, focused. Isolde's hands were clenched so tightly that the knuckles had turned pale. She said nothing. Next to the door, Jolene shifted in her seat. Her eyes met mine. She didn't nod, didn't smile, just watched. But I saw something in her face that I hadn't seen in months. Relief. The screen remained paused on my slide. It wasn't fancy, just clean lines, clean logic, clean evidence. And it was enough. The VP turned to Isolde again. "Do you have the original version you built yourself?" he asked. She opened her mouth, closed it, and didn't speak. I felt no triumph, only the settling of something long displaced. She had spent weeks rehearsing a script that wasn't hers. And now the lights were up, and the cue cards had vanished. She stood frozen. Her fingers twitched at her sides. Her breath grew shallow. Everyone watched, waiting for something. An explanation, an excuse, even a breakdown. None came. Instead, silence filled the space she used to dominate. I didn't look away. I didn't pity her. But I didn't gloat either. Because this wasn't about humiliation. It was about truth reasserting itself. The truth had been patient, methodical. It had worn heels and makeup and charm. But when the numbers spoke, when the logs clicked open, truth stopped needing to dress up. And she wasn't just caught. She was undone by her own silence. The door clicked softly behind her as she left the room, papers tucked against her chest, like they might protect her from something no document ever could. No one followed, no one spoke. It was the quietest adjournment I'd ever witnessed, and somehow it still felt loud. The VP stood, adjusted his blazer, and nodded once in my direction before walking out with the others. Chairs scraped gently across the polished floor, heels tapped in retreat, and just like that, the room emptied. Only Jolene lingered. She didn't approach me. She simply walked by, slow and steady, her shoulder passing within inches of mine. As she passed, she murmured, "You didn't just win. You reminded us what integrity looks like." I turned to glance at her, but she was already out the door. I stayed behind for another 5 minutes. Let the silence stretch. Let the air clear. I needed the stillness, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I was finally calm. By the time I stepped out into the hallway, the building was already shifting back into its afternoon rhythm. Emails pinging, elevators humming, conversations picking back up. But none of it touched me. Not today. I made it back to my desk and collected my things in silence. Laptop, charger, that same USB I'd carried like a weapon all week. The walk to the parking garage was familiar. Familiar but different. My shoes echoed a little louder. My shoulders felt looser. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to brace for whatever came next. Traffic was light. I drove with the window cracked, letting in just enough wind to remind me I was still moving. By the time I reached my apartment, the sky had softened into a dull lavender, clouds shifting like slow exhalations across the city. I slipped off my shoes at the door and made a cup of tea. Chamomile, nothing fancy. Just warm and quiet. Then I opened my laptop and checked my inbox. One new message. Subject, transition, no greeting, no closing line. Effective immediately, I'm stepping away from my current responsibilities. Thank you for your support. Please direct all project-related communication to Layla C. That was it. No name, no apology, no explanation. I read it once, then again, then a third time, just to be sure. And then I deleted it. No screenshot, no forwarding, no saving. She had removed herself, and for once, I didn't feel the need to mark the moment. I left my laptop open and moved to the window. The tea had cooled slightly by the time I took my first sip. Outside, The street was quiet. A dog barked 2 blocks away. Someone's wind chime rang twice in the breeze. I wasn't smiling, but I wasn't grinding my teeth either. For the first time in weeks, maybe longer, I wasn't chasing visibility. I was simply present, solid, real. There was nothing left to fight for, no spotlight to reclaim. The truth had done its work. She disappeared without a goodbye. But I wasn't waiting for one. Later that same week, on a quiet Wednesday evening, my phone buzzed softly on the kitchen counter while I was rinsing out a mug. I didn't rush to check it. There was no longer any urgency to notifications, no instinct to brace for more damage. But when I finally wiped my hands and picked it up, the name on the screen stopped me cold. Dad. It was a simple message. No greeting, no emojis, just 12 words. You were always the one holding the structure. We just didn't see it. Proud of you. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. Then I tapped it back awake just to read it again. It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it didn't need to be. He wasn't the type to say, "I'm sorry." He was the type to say nothing, or worse, to say something dismissive. And yet here it was, a quiet recognition. In his way, it was the loudest thing he'd ever said to me. I didn't reply. Not right away. I just stood there in my kitchen, barefoot, tea cooling on the counter behind me, and let it settle into my chest like something long overdue. The next morning, I arrived at the office to find a company newsletter folded neatly on my desk. We still received a print version, mostly out of tradition. Usually, it gathered dust in break rooms or got tossed beside the copier. But this one had my name on the cover. Logistics Initiative leads Q2 Strategy Push. Vision by Layla C. I blinked. Read it again. Below the headline was a photo of the slide I had presented. My design, my data, my layout. And right beneath it, in clear font, lead architect, Layla C. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt real. No one congratulated me in person that day. No standing ovation. But I noticed subtle shifts. People who hadn't looked me in the eye for weeks now greeted me in the hallway. Emails came without per Isolda's request. And when I walked into the kitchen for coffee, someone had moved my favorite mug to the front of the cabinet. Later that afternoon, I returned from a meeting to find a plain envelope resting on my chair. No handwriting on the outside. I opened it slowly, expecting perhaps a memo or an anonymous complaint, because when you're a woman who wins without smiling, people like to assume you've cheated. But inside was a single note, handwritten, slightly shaky, probably rushed. We knew, we saw. Some of us were just afraid. You showed us how to stand. No signature, no sender. I folded it carefully, pressed the crease flat, and slid it under the base of my monitor. Not as a trophy, as a reminder that not everyone is brave the first time, but sometimes one act of clarity can make the next easier. 2 weeks after Isolda's exit, I was called to present Phase 2 of the project to the executive board. I walked into that same boardroom where everything had once slipped away from me. Only this time, people looked up. And then, one by one, they stood. Not because of protocol, not out of pity, but because they knew. They knew who had built the foundation, who had endured, who had stayed steady while someone else played with the paint. I stood at the head of the room, not as an assistant, not as a silent worker behind the curtain, but as the rightful lead. I clicked the remote. The screen lit up. Next phase implementation, National Rollout Plan, lead, Layla C. My voice didn't tremble. I didn't rush. This model works, I said, pointing to the diagram on the screen. But it only works when we acknowledge every builder, every contributor, every hour no one sees. Heads nodded. Pens moved. No one interrupted. I continued, outlining the logistics chain, the real-time feedback loop, and predictive capacity for peak demand seasons. And when I finished, there were no lingering doubts, no sideways glances. Only space. Space I had cleared myself. I didn't just reclaim what was mine. I rewrote where I belong. Sometimes the most powerful statement isn't made with shouting or confrontation, but with proof, patience, and timing. Layla's story reminds us that being underestimated doesn't mean being powerless. And sometimes, the quiet ones build the loudest legacies. Have you ever had someone take credit for your work, or silence your contribution completely? What did you do, or wish you had? If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. There's more to come: real stories, real voices, and the quiet strength behind them. Hi, my name is Brooklyn, and my sister didn't just lie, she discarded my life. She took the one thing keeping my body from shutting down and dropped it into a trash chute on a plane. Then told everyone I was just being dramatic. The captain called my name over the intercom, and in that split second, the panic on her face said everything. But what hurts more than losing $18,000 worth of meds at 35,000 feet is realizing your own family's been rewriting your story for years. What else had she thrown away that no one saw? My name's Brooklyn Maris, and I don't like attention. I never have. I'm the kind of person who apologizes when someone else bumps into me. I say sorry when I sneeze too loud. When I cry in public, I apologize to the air itself, as if my emotions were somehow breaking the peace. That's what made what happened on that flight so unbearable, because it wasn't just the pain. It wasn't even the $18,000 worth of medication that vanished like it meant nothing. It was that I was made small. Again. In front of strangers. By my own sister. We were headed to San Francisco for what was supposed to be a hopeful visit. A specialist clinic. A new round of experimental treatment. I hadn't felt this anxious and excited in years. The sky outside the small airplane window looked like it belonged in a postcard. That dusty blue kind of peace only Colorado skies know how to give you. But inside my body, a storm had begun to stir. I shifted in my seat, trying not to show the stiffness in my legs, the tightness in my arms. I could feel the flare-up starting, like a silent alarm only I could hear. "Celine," I said under my breath, my voice already tightening, "can you get the gray pouch from my bag?" My sister didn't move at first. She was staring at her phone, lips pursed like she'd just read something distasteful. "The meds," I added softer. "It's time." She sighed. Not dramatically, not even loudly, just enough to cut. Enough to let me know she wasn't thrilled. With a measured motion, she reached down, retrieved the pouch, and handed it over like it was something distasteful. Her eyes didn't even meet mine. I bit down the familiar urge to thank her anyway. Opening the pouch, I pulled out one of the preloaded syringes. It was chilled, just as it needed to be, resting between the two gel packs. My hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the creeping fatigue in my muscles. A flight attendant passed our row just then. I looked up, attempting a polite smile. "Excuse me, could I get some water?" She nodded, began to reach for a plastic cup, but then Celine's voice came out, louder than necessary. "She's fine. She does this." She let out a breathy laugh. "Always when the spotlight's not on her, she's just being dramatic." I froze. The attendant looked at me, then back at Celine, unsure what to make of the dynamic. Other heads turned. I could feel their eyes, the unspoken judgment. I wanted to disappear into the floor. "She's on medication," I tried to explain. It's for a condition." Celine leaned toward the attendant, voice lowered just enough for me to still hear. "She gets like this when she thinks no one's paying attention. I'm her sister. Trust me." Trust me. 2 words that, coming from her, always meant the opposite. The attendant nodded awkwardly and moved on. My hands had gone cold. I placed the syringe back into the pouch with slow, deliberate care. "I'll take that up front," Celine said suddenly, reaching over. "Let me explain it to them properly so there's no confusion." I blinked. "No, Celine, it's fine. I don't need help." She smiled, that plastic, performative smile she'd perfected since we were kids. "Let me. I know how to talk to people." Before I could stop her, she had the pouch in her hand and was striding toward the front galley. I watched her back retreat down the narrow aisle. I wanted to follow, to scream, to demand, but I sat frozen, 100 memories of being silenced bearing down on my chest. Seconds passed. A minute, maybe two. Then I saw her, just barely visible through the open curtain. She opened the trash chute, and with a flick of her wrist, she dropped it in. I didn't even hear the sound. I felt it, like the pressure change when a plane hits turbulence. But inside my lungs, my stomach turned. I couldn't breathe. A gray insulated pouch. My entire medical supply for the week. My lifeline. Gone. Like trash. I couldn't even finish the sentence. She threw it away. I gripped the armrest. My chest tightened. My jaw clenched, holding back everything that wanted to come out. The scream, the sob, the fury. The flight crew turned to her. She was already speaking, her hands moving gently, like she was explaining a complicated situation at a conference. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. I had no oxygen left. Just betrayal. Then, the overhead speaker crackled to life. Passenger Brooklyn Maris, please remain seated. A medical staff will meet you upon landing. The cabin shifted. Eyes turned. I felt a ripple in the air. That's when Celine's confidence cracked. Just for a second. Celine's mask didn't fall right away. It flickered, like static on a screen that hadn't quite lost its signal. Her lips curled into that tight, controlled smile she wore anytime she needed to look like the calm, rational one. To anyone glancing from a distance, she looked concerned. Compassionate, even. But I knew better. I'd known that look since I was 12. The flight attendant gave her a short nod before disappearing toward the front. Celine turned to me then, eyes sharp but mouth soft. "You okay?" she asked, like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just tossed my meds down the trash chute and gaslit me in front of an entire cabin. I didn't answer. Instead, I closed my eyes and let my mind drift, away from the recycled air and the choked-back nausea in my throat, into memories I hadn't dared touch in a long time. Florida, 3 years ago. I'd booked that trip on my own, using my savings, finally determined to see a specialist without Celine hovering. She insisted on coming, just in case. I was too tired to fight her. Somehow at the airport, my insulated cooler never made it onto the plane. Celine swore she'd loaded it herself. Maybe TSA flagged it, she'd offered, shrugging. She looked genuinely baffled. I remember feeling guilty for even suspecting otherwise. Then Denver. Last year. Hotel room, sleek, minimalist, perfect for Instagram. Celine had brought me tea while I lay half-curled on the bed, joints flaring like they were wrapped in fire. She told me to rest, that she'd handle packing the meds back into the fridge. The next morning, the pouch was missing. "Must have gotten tossed by housekeeping," she said. "Don't look at me like that, Brooklyn." Both times, I told myself these things happen. Travel gets chaotic. Mistakes are made. But this time, I watched her do it. And still, I felt my brain reaching for some rational explanation, some softer version of the truth that didn't make my own sister a deliberate threat to my life. There was a reason for that, and it had nothing to do with logic. It had everything to do with what I'd been taught growing up. "You need to stop making everything about you, Brooklyn." That's what my mother used to say. Every time I cried after physical therapy, every time I needed help getting up from the couch, every time I asked for anything that required Celine to slow down for half a second. "You think the world owes you comfort?" she once asked me over dinner. I was 16. My hand trembled as I tried to hold a fork steady. Celine works twice as hard and doesn't complain. I remember Celine glancing up from her plate, chewing slowly. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The silence did all the work for her. That was the real pattern. It wasn't just lost meds or fake concern. It was decades of being made to feel like my very existence was inconvenient. Now, on this flight, with the pain beginning to spike and my body begging for the drug that was no longer there, I realized how deep the damage went. My jaw clenched. My fingers curled around my phone, the plastic case digging into my palm. I pulled up the airline's app, navigated to the medical assistance section. The words on the screen blurred slightly, then snapped back into focus. Medical alert submission. Describe incident. I typed, then deleted, then typed again. She destroyed my medication. I'm in pain. This was deliberate. I hovered over the sendy button, thumb trembling, not from weakness, but from the old reflex to not make waves. Across the aisle, a man coughed. Behind me, a child laughed, oblivious. The world kept spinning, but I wasn't dramatic. Not this time. I hit send. The screen blinked. Confirmation. Response activated. Celine leaned toward me, the smile returning to her voice before her face. You're not going to ruin this trip, Brooklyn. Not again. I looked at her. Really looked. She still believed she was in control. She still believed I would fold. But for the first time, I didn't shrink. She looked caught off script. That's the best way I can describe it. Like someone whose teleprompter just glitched mid-sentence. Her eyes darted toward mine, then quickly away. A pause too long. A breath too calculated. If you didn't know Celine like I did, you might think she was just shaken out of concern. But I saw it. That flicker. The smallest glitch in her performance. The flight attendant didn't return right away. She'd gone toward the cockpit, and from the tension in Celine's posture, I knew that unsettled her more than anything I'd said. She leaned back in her seat, adjusted her cardigan like she always did when she needed to regain composure, then pulled out her phone. Scrolled. Pretended to text. Anything to re-anchor herself in the image she curated so tightly. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Just like she hated it. Because silence, when intentional, is loud. My body, however, was not quiet. The stiffness in my neck had traveled to my shoulders and was now nesting deep in my spine. It wasn't the worst flare-up I'd had, but it was rising, like water slowly creeping toward your throat. And the one thing that kept it from overflowing was now inside a waste chute lined with soda cans and sandwich wrappers. I shifted slightly in my seat, trying to stretch my legs, but space was tight. Not as bad as last year, though. That flight, Celine had kindly offered to switch seats with me at the gate because she said her row had better Wi-Fi. I didn't ask why that mattered on a 2-hour flight. I just nodded and took her ticket without protest. Only after boarding did I realize she'd put me in a cramped window seat in the very back row. Non-reclining, no room to stretch, jammed next to a bathroom with a flickering light. When I asked her about it, she just smiled. "Don't be so sensitive," she said. "You should be grateful I booked anything at all." I remember gripping the armrests that day, biting back tears while trying to inject myself with the biologic as turbulence bounced us around. The woman next to me had offered her ginger ale. I smiled and said thank you. I've gotten good at accepting pity drinks and borrowed grace. That memory, like so many others, bubbled up now, not because I wanted it to, but because trauma doesn't ask for permission. I reached into my bag, tucked deep inside a side pocket, folded 3 times to keep the edges from tearing, was a letter. The envelope had yellowed slightly, corners bent from years of travel. I never mailed it, never meant to, really. It was to my dad. He died 8 years ago, pancreatic cancer that moved too fast for any of us to catch up. He was the only person who ever noticed when my pain wasn't visible, who asked how I was even when I smiled too hard, who didn't accuse me of exaggerating just because I needed a moment to sit down. After he passed, I wrote that letter one night when the flare-up had lasted 6 straight days. I was angry. At my body, yes, but also at Celine, at Mom, at myself, for letting them dictate the way I saw my own worth. I never showed anyone, especially not Celine. But now, sitting here, trapped at 35,000 feet, I unfolded it for the first time in years. The handwriting was shaky, smudged in parts, but the words were etched deep in my memory. I don't need them to carry me, Dad. I just want them to stop calling it a performance. I wish someone would believe me without asking for proof. I pressed the letter against my knee, closed my eyes. It felt like holding a version of myself I'd abandoned years ago. One who still hoped that a carefully worded explanation might finally earn understanding. That girl was gone. But maybe, just maybe, this new version didn't need anyone's permission to exist. A soft voice pulled me back. "Ma'am, can I get you anything?" The attendant was back, her face neutral but attentive. Celine straightened slightly, ready to speak, but I beat her to it. "Yes," I said, my voice even, deliberate. "I need you to know that my medication was destroyed, not misplaced, not lost. It was deliberately thrown out." Her brows lifted slightly. She glanced at Celine, then back at me. "I have a medical condition," I continued. "What was in that pouch was not cosmetic. It wasn't optional. It was my treatment, and it's gone." The silence between us stretched. Celine shifted beside me. "Brooklyn, let's not make this more—" "No," I said, cutting her off for the first time in years. The attendant nodded slowly. "I understand. I'll report this to the captain." "Thank you." No apology, no smile, just facts. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't smoothing anything over. The attendant walked away. Celine sat frozen for a beat, then leaned in, her voice low and clipped. "What exactly are you trying to do here?" I folded the letter with steady hands, slid it back into my bag. "The truth," I said. "Just that." She blinked. For once, she didn't know what to say. It was the first time Celine looked unsure of her script. The hush that followed her silence wasn't accidental. It was the kind of quiet that made people uncomfortable, not because there was nothing to say, but because everyone suddenly knew too much. The flight attendant walked with purpose toward the cockpit, disappearing behind the blue curtain like she had a mission to complete. I watched Celine's eyes follow her, a flash of calculation sparking across her face. She shifted in her seat, smoothed her blouse, recrossed her legs, and folded her hands tightly together like she was prepping for a courtroom. For once, I didn't break the silence. Neither did she. Not yet. And then the intercom cracked. "Passenger Brooklyn Maris." The captain's voice rang calm but firm. "Please remain in your seat. Medical assistance will meet you upon arrival." I didn't move. I didn't even blink. The name echoed through the cabin like a gavel. Clear, direct, final. Celine's face paled. The corners of her mouth twitched like she was about to object, but then she caught herself. A few heads turned. One man up front glanced our way, then leaned closer to the woman beside him. The ripple had begun. That was when Celine leaned sideways, speaking just loud enough for the row behind to hear. "She's had flare-ups like this before," she said to no one and everyone. "We've been through this. It's not what it looks like." I felt my body tense, but I didn't respond. Not yet. "She just gets worked up," Celine added. "It's part of her condition." I reached slowly into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone, and opened the voice memos. "You don't have to do this," she whispered. I ignored her. With one tap, I played a recording. It wasn't today's conversation. It was from last winter, one I'd saved but never shared. Until now. "Honestly, I tossed one of the syringes," her voice said through the tiny speaker. "Brooklyn was acting unhinged and dramatic, and I didn't think she should have control over those meds when she's like that." The sound wasn't loud, but in the stillness of the plane, every word felt amplified. The row in front of us went rigid. Someone turned. Someone else gasped. Celine's lips parted. "That's out of context." I stopped the playback and turned to her, speaking just loud enough to match the volume she had used minutes ago. "And this," I said, nodding toward the front of the cabin, "is from 10 minutes ago." She blinked twice, mouth tightening. "You're trying to destroy me." "No," I said evenly. "You're just finally not controlling the narrative." Across the aisle, a woman in her 50s muttered under her breath, "You don't throw away someone's medicine. No matter what. Selene heard her. I saw it in the way her shoulders curled inward, the way she avoided eye contact. It was subtle, but to me, it was everything. It meant the power had shifted. I breathed slowly through my nose, forcing my hands to relax against my thighs. My pulse was steady now, not calm, but certain. The captain's voice returned overhead. This time, it wasn't for me. Cabin crew, please prepare for descent. Selene turned toward the window. Her reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar. Older, harsher. Maybe it was just the lighting. Or maybe it was that, for the first time, the role she'd rehearsed her whole life wasn't landing. I sat taller. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time, I wasn't the one defending myself. Now the cabin wasn't just watching, it was witnessing. People don't need a full backstory to understand injustice when they see it. Sometimes all it takes is a look, a tone, or the kind of silence that feels weaponized. That's what was happening. The mood in the plane shifted. No longer a personal conflict, but something everyone in earshot couldn't pretend not to notice. Selene felt it too. She leaned forward with sudden urgency, reaching for my hand like we were still sisters in the traditional sense, like our bond hadn't corroded with years of small betrayals. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she said, her voice breaking in practiced waves. I was scared, Brooklyn. I thought the meds were old. I just didn't want you to get hurt. It was a new script, but her delivery was familiar. Her voice trembled just enough to feel real to someone who didn't know her patterns. But I knew them. She'd used the same act in high school when she cried to avoid consequences for throwing out my medical forms the night before a school trip. Back then, Mom believed her. Teachers did too. I had no proof, just pain. This time, I didn't flinch. I didn't pull away, but I didn't squeeze her hand either. Sarah! Selene called out to the nearest flight attendant, who'd been lingering nearby. I didn't mean any harm. I panicked. The woman stopped mid-step. That pouch you threw away, she said slowly, contained a temperature-controlled medical biologic, correct? Selene didn't answer right away. I didn't think it was that serious, she finally muttered. Sarah nodded, her expression unreadable. Just so we're clear, that's classified as a sealed medical device. It's not something we discard casually. Selene's shoulders tensed. I was just trying to protect her. You don't know what she's like sometimes. My jaw clenched, but I didn't speak. Instead, I opened the flight app on my phone and pulled up my reservation history. A few taps later, I turned the screen towards Sarah. This was a refill trip I booked 3 months ago, I explained. Paid for with my own money. Selene called the clinic behind my back, said the family had a scheduling conflict and that I wouldn't make it. She canceled the appointment and rerouted my flight. Sarah leaned in slightly, reading the confirmation emails and the time-stamped message from the clinic. That wasn't concern, I said quietly. That was control. That's when the woman across the aisle stood up. She had silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and wore an old denim jacket that didn't match her luggage or her quiet confidence. I saw her toss the pouch, she said clearly. I was watching the whole thing. She looked around first, like she knew it wasn't right. I recorded it. Selene whipped her head toward her. You don't even know us. I don't need to, the woman replied calmly. I'm a nurse. Was, anyway. 32 years in trauma. That look on her face when she did it wasn't confusion, it was intent. She held up her phone, screen paused mid-motion. The moment Selene extended her arm, hovering the pouch above the chute. My name's Minerva Quaid, she added, and I'll be giving a full statement. Selene's face drained of color. For the first time, I could see the veneer crack, not just in expression, but in posture. She sagged slightly, her hands folded into her lap. She was preparing for damage control. Look, she began, voice softer now. This is a misunderstanding. A bad judgment call, maybe, but... Sarah raised her hand. Ma'am, I'm going to need to take this footage to the captain. Stay in your seat. Selene tried to speak again, but Sarah had already turned, walking toward the galley, phone in hand. As she disappeared behind the curtain, Selene looked around. Her eyes scanned the cabin, hoping, no, pleading, for someone to defend her. No one did. That didn't stop her from trying. "You people don't get it," she muttered, loud enough for Minerva and two nearby passengers to hear. "You don't know what she puts this family through. She manipulates. Always has." Minerva didn't blink. Her voice was steady, almost gentle. "I understand enough." The air grew heavier. It wasn't just a confrontation anymore. It was exposure, uncontrolled, unfiltered, undeniable. No more whispered doubts or gaslit versions of events. Now it was all out in the open, and I didn't have to say a word. The curtain wasn't just falling on her story, it was rising on mine. The moment Sarah spoke those words, "You will be escorted on landing," Selene stopped blinking. Her mouth remained slightly open, as if her next line had vanished mid-air. She looked at me like I had become unrecognizable. And in a way, I had. I wasn't bracing for the fallout anymore. I wasn't folding myself into the corners of our family dynamic just to make room for her performance. For the first time, I wasn't scared of being heard. Sarah moved quietly down the aisle, passing a young woman with pink-tinted hair who had a phone positioned just below eye level. She didn't look away when Sarah walked by. She just adjusted the angle and kept streaming. A whisper floated from 2 rows ahead. 70,000 people, someone murmured, and counting. I glanced across the aisle. A teenage boy was showing his phone screen to his father, both of them watching the live stream unfold in real time. Selene noticed. Her eyes flitted from one pair of strangers to the next. Her hands reached for the edges of the tray table, anchoring to something, anything. "You're really doing this to me?" she said under her breath. "Brooklyn, we're family." I didn't answer, not yet. The captain's voice filled the cabin once again, measured, but tinged with a formality that told everyone on board this was no routine flight. Due to an onboard medical concern and internal investigation, we are alerting our ground team to meet the aircraft upon arrival. We thank you for your cooperation. No one clapped. The only sound was the low hum of the engines and the occasional ding from passengers checking their phones, refreshing the feed. Selene shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her fingers tapped rhythmically on her thigh, a habit she'd had since high school debates. When she felt cornered, she'd talk faster, spin the narrative. But this wasn't a stage she could control. Jessa, the girl with the pink hair, spoke to the camera again, not loud, but just audible. "You're watching it unfold live. A woman in chronic pain had her medication destroyed. By her sister. This isn't fiction. This is what gaslighting looks like on a plane." The comment section on her screen raced so fast it blurred. Hearts floated up the side like confetti. Some of them had typed my name. Others simply said, "Believe her." I didn't need them to believe me. I just needed them to see her. Selene turned to me again, more urgently this time. "You know how this looks. Don't do this. Please." "I'm not doing anything," I replied evenly. "I'm just not erasing myself anymore." That shut her up. Minerva, still seated upright and watchful, glanced over. Her nod was barely perceptible, but it held weight. Then, I finally turned to Selene, looked her straight in the eye, and said the thing I'd been holding in for far too long. "You built a whole world where I was always the problem, where every bruise, every symptom, every flare-up was me being fragile, emotional, needy." She blinked rapidly. "But I'm still here," I continued, my voice steady. "I'm still breathing. I still exist." The lines around her mouth hardened. Her hand reached up, almost instinctively, to tuck her hair behind her ear. The move was empty, mechanical. "You think this fixes anything?" she said. "You think strangers online get to rewrite what our family went through?" "No," I said. "They're not rewriting anything. They're just watching the version you never wanted them to see." She looked like she might cry again, but not because she was sad, because she was caught, and she knew it. Sarah reappeared at the front of the cabin, this time with a different tone in her voice, one that wasn't just professional, but procedural. "The captain has filed an incident report," she said quietly. "Security and medical personnel will meet us upon landing. You may remain seated, but please prepare to speak with the crew." Her eyes landed on Selene for a beat too long. Selene gave a small nod, just enough to acknowledge she had heard. She didn't say another word. I leaned back in my seat, the pressure in my spine flaring again, reminding me that the cost of this moment was steep, but it was worth it, every second. Because for the first time, the narrative wasn't hers. The weight of what she'd done couldn't be hidden behind a sob or a polished sentence. It had been caught, in data logs, in videos, in voices that weren't mine. She couldn't explain it away, and the world wasn't listening to her anymore. This wasn't revenge, it was release. Selene muttered something under her breath, just barely loud enough for me to hear. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. Her hands were trembling in her lap, and her breath came in shallow pulls, like she was trying to stay upright while her world crumbled. That look she'd mastered all her life, the practiced calm, the media-ready grin, it was gone, replaced by something raw and far less polished. A crew member appeared at my elbow with a clipboard. "Ms. Maris," she said, her voice neutral, "we need your statement for the captain's log. It's voluntary, but it helps our crew file the formal report with ground personnel." I didn't hesitate. I reached for the pen, signed my name, printed it underneath. "What happens now?" I asked quietly. "We'll divert to Denver," she said, glancing toward the cockpit. "Legal and medical teams will meet us on the ground." Behind her, I heard a passenger whisper, "Good!" Someone else muttered, "Finally." It was subtle, but it was happening. The passengers weren't just passive anymore. They were watching her, judging her. She wasn't the hero of the scene anymore. She wasn't even the narrator. The cabin had turned. Jessa, still holding her phone in livestream mode, turned slightly toward the aisle. "I just want to remind everyone watching," she said calmly, "that this woman," she tilted the camera discreetly toward Selene, "is a public advocate. Board member of 2 nonprofits, featured in Forbes' Women of Influence list last year. Her name is Selene Artis." Selene's head jerked toward her. "You're doxing me now?" "I'm quoting your own website," Jessa replied, unfazed. "You posted it." A man in first class leaned back toward the coach section. "She should be banned from flying." "You destroy someone's meds. You don't get to act like a victim," a woman added behind him. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. That's when Minerva stood up again, steady and composed as ever. She wasn't waving her phone this time. She simply looked at the nearest attendant and said, "When we land, I'd like to speak to the captain directly. I've got footage. It's clear." And I was watching her body language the entire time. Sarah nodded. "We'll make that happen, ma'am." Minerva turned to me and added, "It wasn't just the act. It was the intent." She smiled when she dropped it. Selene scoffed. "You misread it. It was stress." Sarah took Minerva's phone, played a short clip, and frowned. "That's not stress," she said. "That's deliberate destruction of medical property." The words hung in the air, heavier than I expected. Deliberate destruction. It was no longer just a family matter. It was no longer between sisters. It had crossed a legal line. But what came next was the part I didn't expect. Not so soon, at least. "Wait a second," a voice said from behind. It was a man with graying temples, holding up his own phone. "This article says Selene Artis is the sole beneficiary of her sister's life insurance policy." My stomach clenched. Selene turned beet red. "That's outdated," she snapped. "It's not even—" "I changed it last month," I said clearly. "She just didn't know." A hush fell again. That single detail, paired with everything else, changed the tone in the room entirely. Jessa murmured into her stream, This just turned into something darker. I didn't want to think about that part. Not here, not now. But I also knew how it looked, and it wasn't good for her. Celine sank into her seat. She looked smaller now, diminished, like the weight of every story she'd twisted had finally landed on her chest. Then the intercom pinged. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice returned. "Due to onboard medical and legal circumstances, this flight will divert to Denver International. We ask for your patience as we coordinate with ground teams. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for descent." And just like that, the final shift occurred. People weren't whispering anymore. They were openly watching her, some with disdain, some with disbelief, all with the knowledge that they'd witnessed something real and ugly. Celine didn't move. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She just sat there, frozen. And me? I exhaled, slowly. Not because I'd won, but because I could finally breathe without her shadow blocking the air. As the aircraft's wheels kissed the runway, a shudder rippled through the cabin, one that had less to do with the landing gear and more with the tension that had settled in the air like thick fog. The applause was hesitant, uneven, not celebratory, just relieved. I didn't join in. I couldn't. My joints had stiffened to the point of locking. The pain had traveled into my hips and knees, a dull, relentless throb that made my legs feel like they'd been carved from iron and left out in the cold. I clutched the armrest and focused on my breath. In, out. Steady. But my mind was crystal clear. Across from me, Celine sat rigid, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her face pale and unreadable. The transformation from composed PR queen to cornered defendant had taken less than an hour, but the damage was done. The cabin had seen, heard, judged, and now we were on the ground. The seatbelt sign chimed off, but no one moved. The front door hadn't opened yet. The curtain remained drawn. Then came the shift. Footsteps, a metallic click. Then a uniformed woman stepped on board with a pair of EMTs behind her. One of them, a nurse in her 40s with calm eyes, approached me first. "Ms. Maris?" she asked gently. "Yes," I managed. "We received a medical alert during flight. You were flagged for urgent assessment." I nodded, swallowing past the tightness in my throat. My voice came out rough. "My medication was destroyed in the air. I'm having a flare." She crouched to eye level, already pulling on gloves. "We're going to check your vitals now. You'll be escorted for full evaluation." Behind her, Celine stood up, voice dripping with practiced concern. "I'm her sister. I can help explain." The security officer who had boarded beside the EMTs stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "you are not the patient. Please step back." Celine opened her mouth, but the nurse cut in without even looking at her. "We need space," she said. "Let's keep it professional." It wasn't just a medical procedure now. It was protocol, and she no longer had a seat at the table. I let them work. Blood pressure cuff, oxygen check, pupil response. My heart was fast, but steady. The EMT whispered something to the security guard, and within seconds, the captain himself stepped on board. He walked with the weight of authority. A man in command, not just of the aircraft, but now of a public incident. He approached Celine directly. "Ms. Ardis," he said evenly, "you'll be contacted by federal authorities regarding the destruction of medical property. You are not cleared to exit the airport at this time." Her jaw tightened. "I didn't mean for it to—" He raised his hand. "I'm not the one you'll be speaking to." From the gate window, I could see press already gathering. Someone had tipped off the media. Maybe it was the live stream, maybe a passenger. It didn't matter. The consequences had already boarded this flight. As Celine was escorted toward the forward galley for processing, someone in the cabin recorded her. I saw the phone raised discreetly, the red dot blinking. "Finally," someone whispered near the rear. The wheelchair arrived a minute later. I was helped gently into it, my legs throbbing with resistance. The nurse asked if I wanted to be transported all the way to the ambulance bay. No, I said. I want to stand. She blinked. You're in no shape to. I want to walk out. Just a little, 5 feet. Then I'll sit, please. She looked at me for a moment, then nodded. They steadied me on either side, and slowly, painfully, I stood. The flashbulbs caught it. I didn't care, because that was the moment I reclaimed what had been taken from me for years. Not just autonomy, not just credibility, but the simple right to exist without someone else rewriting my story. I took 4 steps, awkward, shaking, but mine. Then I turned to Minerva, who stood just inside the cabin, her arms crossed gently over her chest. Thank you, I said, for seeing me. She smiled, a slow, knowing curve. Some of us don't forget how to look. The security officer guided me toward the bridge, and as I passed the row where Celine now sat, flanked by uniformed staff, she turned her head sharply. Her eyes met mine for the first time since the incident. Are you happy now? She asked in a whisper only I could hear. I didn't stop, didn't reply, just walked, because for once I wasn't answering to her anymore. A week later, I found myself seated beneath a banner that read, Invisible Illness and Institutional Bias, a Public Conversation. It hung modestly over the panel stage at the University of California Medical Center, nothing glossy or overly polished, just white fabric with bold navy letters. But it carried more weight than most headlines I'd seen that year. I wasn't nervous, at least not in the way I used to be. My hands weren't shaking, my mouth wasn't dry. I wasn't bracing for someone to question my pain. I was just ready. They mic'd me up. The panel was already live, streamed across the hospital's website, and simulcast on 3 advocacy pages that had picked up my story. Over 200,000 people were watching. I didn't know their names, didn't need to. I just knew I wasn't speaking into a void. When the moderator asked me to open the discussion, I took a slow breath, then spoke. I used to think I had to be believed to survive, I began. That if the people closest to me, my sister, my mother, my teachers, didn't believe my illness was real, then maybe it wasn't. I thought their trust validated my experience. I glanced down, then back up. I was wrong. The room didn't stir. No one reached for their phone or cleared their throat. They were listening. I'm not angry, I continued. Not anymore, not even at her. I'm angry that I built my sense of safety around someone else's approval, that I spent years trying to act healthy enough to earn credibility, instead of just being sick and needing help. A pause. That kind of pretending doesn't just wear you down, it erases you, bit by bit. Minerva sat in the front row, arms folded across her chest, a proud half-smile resting on her face. I didn't need her to nod. Her presence was enough. There was applause when I finished, but I didn't let it settle too long. The discussion moved forward. Doctors, advocates, legal experts weighing in. Still, the moderator kept circling back to what had happened on that plane. The clip of Celine, caught mid-gesture at the galley, had now become an emblem on social media. Dozens of captions had followed it. When ableism wears pearls. PR-trained gaslighting in real time. Believe the quiet one. Celine didn't show up to the panel. She hadn't spoken publicly since the incident, except through her attorney. Her PR firm quietly dropped her days after the footage went viral. The statement they released was lukewarm at best. Ms. Artis deeply regrets the misunderstanding and respects the dignity of all people living with chronic conditions. A journalist commented on air that same day. Silence is louder when guilt stays in the room it walked out of. It stuck with me, not as triumph, but as truth. They asked me to close the panel with any final words. I hesitated, then said, sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones who work hardest to redefine your story. That doesn't make them evil, it makes them dangerous. Later, in the lobby, one of the tech team members played a clip that had surfaced from the flight. It wasn't part of the main footage, It had been recorded from several rows back. A child's voice, soft and curious, asked her mother, "Why would someone throw away her medicine if she's hurting?" I didn't remember hearing it at the time. I'd been too focused on staying conscious, staying composed. But hearing it now, that tiny question rang louder than any speech I could have written, because that was the whole story. Outside, the wind was sharp, tinged with ocean salt and car exhaust. I stepped through the sliding doors of the medical center, my coat pulled tight around my ribs. The cold didn't bite the way it used to. I wasn't flinching at every sound or glance. A woman passed by and smiled, her toddler tugging at her sleeve. "How are you feeling?" she asked softly. I didn't know her, but she said it like it mattered. I didn't answer out of habit. I didn't soften my truth to make it palatable. "I feel seen," I said. "That's new." She smiled wider and walked on. Behind me, the glass doors hissed closed. Sometimes the people who claim to protect you are the very ones holding the scissors behind your back. This wasn't just about a sister throwing away medication. It was about rewriting the narrative, reclaiming a voice, and realizing that justice doesn't always come with sirens. Sometimes it comes in silence. Have you ever had to choose between peace and being believed? Let me know your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that reveal what really happens behind closed doors. Hi, I'm Isleen. My parents said I was just an extra mouth to feed. They didn't scream. They didn't fight. They just left an envelope with $200 and locked the door behind me. But the part that still haunts me? They erased me so quietly, so politely, that even I started to believe I never belonged. They cut me out of photos, out of conversations, out of the family's finances like I was never meant to exist. So, what happens when the daughter they erased comes back and buys the roof over their heads? You ever wonder how far someone will go when they're pushed out of their own story? It didn't start with a slap. Or a scream. It wasn't dramatic, not the kind of scene that leaves dishes shattered or voices hoarse. It was just dinner. The kind where everyone sat in their usual spot, like always. The dining room lights buzzed faintly overhead, and the smell of overcooked meatloaf clung to the air like a memory that wouldn't let go. Mom had forgotten the salt again, or maybe she hadn't forgotten. Maybe she just didn't care anymore. Her attention was fixed on her iPad, flipping through the slides for her next real estate seminar while pretending to be present. Dad, as usual, turned on the post-game talk radio the second he walked in. He liked the noise. Said it filled the silence, but it wasn't just silence he was covering up. It was the quiet failure of a family that hadn't spoken honestly in years. Callista sat to my right, her laptop open even at the dinner table. She barely glanced up. Her fingers tapped rhythmically, always answering, always somewhere else. She wore that half-smile she reserved for people beneath her notice me, included. Across from me was a man I didn't recognize. Dad had mumbled something about him being a former coworker or a friend from his golf league. No introduction, no hello. Just another guest I wasn't supposed to interrupt. I sat there with my fork, lifting food to my mouth out of habit more than hunger. My plate was chipped, same one I'd had since high school. Nobody had bothered to replace it. I guess it suited me. A little cracked, but still expected to hold it together. Mom poured iced tea and laughed at one of her own comments, then looked around the table like a performer waiting for applause. Then she said it. "Well, it's not easy feeding 4 mouths when only 3 bring something to the table." The air left the room. The words were quiet, surgical, and somehow more lethal than any yell could have been. They cut through the radio chatter, through the clink of silverware. Even the guest paused mid-chew. Callista didn't even blink. "Dad?" He sipped his tea like nothing had been said, like I hadn't just been erased in real time. I looked down at my plate. I didn't say a word. I just kept chewing. Because that was the only power I had left in that moment, not to cry, not to flinch, just to finish the bite. Later that evening, after the guest had left, and the kitchen was filled with the soft hum of the dishwasher, Dad called me into the living room. The lights were dimmed low, the way he liked them. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look angry. That almost made it worse. He handed me a folder with a few pages inside. One of them was a removal form for the family health insurance plan. "We're adjusting a few things," he said casually. "You're almost 30. It's time to start managing your own coverage. No discussion, no, 'Are you okay?' Or, 'Do you need help getting started?' Just a signature line and a dried-out pen." I looked down at the paper. My name was printed near the bottom in faded ink, as though someone had cued it for deletion weeks ago and just forgot to hit confirm. And still, I signed. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know where else to go. What choice did I have? I walked back to my room and laid the form on my desk, staring at it under the weak glow of my old desk lamp. Some foolish part of me thought maybe, just maybe, it would transform into something else. An apology, a letter of explanation, a hidden message saying, "We see you, we love you. We just didn't know how to say it." But it was exactly what it looked like. A final stroke in the quiet erasure of my place in this house. I sat down on the edge of my bed. Everything around me looked the same, walls still covered with old posters, a drawer still stuck from the time I spilled nail polish inside it. But something inside me shifted. Not a breakdown, not a scream, just a recognition. A cold, clean truth finally taking shape in the pit of my stomach. They were phasing me out. Not loudly, not violently, but slowly, strategically. The way you backspace a sentence you regret writing, one letter at a time, until nothing's left. I leaned forward, elbows on knees, and for the first time in years, I let myself remember. Graduation day, high school. I was standing in a too-long gown with sweaty palms, waiting to hear my name. I'd looked for Mom in the front row, thought I saw her head at first, but it was just a stranger. Later, she told me she had a migraine, but she'd been there for Callistus, cried the whole time, hugged her with both arms. When it was my turn, I walked across that stage alone. No camera flash, no cheer. I had told myself then that it was bad luck, that maybe next time it would be different. But deep down, I think I knew. And now I was certain. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling until the light fixture blurred. Then, I whispered it out loud, not to them, but to myself. Just to make it real. They want me gone. And this time, I heard it clearly. And 2 weeks later, they made sure I was. After that dinner, everything in the house shifted, but no one said a word. Mom stopped asking if I wanted anything from the store. Dad quit updating me about which bill had been paid. Callista barely looked up when I walked into a room. The silence stretched so wide, I could almost hear my own presence. I kept to my corner, folded my laundry a little too perfectly, washed the dishes before anyone asked. I figured if I stayed useful, I'd be tolerated. I even packed a small bag, kept it in the closet behind the boxes labeled Christmas. Not out of paranoia, just instinct. Then Friday came. I had gone for a short walk around the neighborhood, more to clear my head than to go anywhere. The air was heavy, the kind of humid that makes everything feel like it's sagging. When I stepped back inside, the first thing I noticed was how still the house was. No radio, no typing, no clanking of dishes. Just silence. There was an envelope on the kitchen counter. Plain, no name. I opened it with the kind of careful dread you reserve for test results and breakups. Inside were 2 folded bills, $100 bills, and a short note in Dad's handwriting. "We think it's time. You'll land on your feet. You're smart." That was it. No, "We love you." No, "Let us help." Just a clear, clean nudge out the door, like I was a fledgling that overstayed the nest. I didn't storm upstairs. I didn't demand answers. I walked back to my room and opened the closet, took out the small duffel, added a toothbrush, my charger, and a change of clothes. I left the framed diploma on the nightstand. It had always looked out of place here. When I stepped out, no one stopped me. The front door closed behind me, like a period at the end of a sentence no one wanted to write. I spent the first night at a diner, nursing a cup of coffee until sunrise. The second night, I found a bench under an old billboard that still advertised phone books. On the third, it rained. Not a gentle drizzle, real Texas rain, loud and merciless. I stood at the front steps, soaked through, and holding my bag like a life preserver. I knocked. Once, twice, a third time. The porch light flickered on, and through the sheer curtain, I saw her. Mom. She looked right at me, and then she pulled the curtain shut. She didn't need to say a word. I stood there long enough to feel the cold settle in my bones. Then I turned, walked back down the steps, and didn't look back. I ended up at a roadside motel near the edge of town, one of those places with neon lights that never quite work and a vending machine that eats your quarters half the time. I paid for a room with the cash Dad left me $200 to buy my silence and send me on my way. The room smelled of mildew and disappointment. The sheets were thin, the walls thinner. A family argued next door, voices rising and falling like background music to my thoughts. I lay on the bed, scrolling through my phone, no new messages. No missed calls. No one was wondering where I was. That night, something broke free inside me. Not a scream or a sob, just a quiet fracture. A small shift in how I saw everything, including myself. They didn't slam the door shut. They just locked it. And I had been waiting on the wrong porch. If this is what it feels like to be erased, I whispered to the empty room, then maybe I needed to vanish before I could be seen. I didn't expect my second chance to come from a coat I gave away 15 years ago. By the third night in that motel, I'd stopped pretending to care how I looked. The mirror told the truth: sunken cheeks, salt-streaked hair, eyes that didn't flinch anymore. I hadn't eaten since a vending machine lunch 2 days back, and even that was mostly stale pretzels and soda syrup. My fingers hovered over my phone. There were only a few contacts left, most of them distant, digital, or dead. But one name sat near the bottom of the list, like a footnote I'd never deleted. Thane Morales. We hadn't spoken since high school. Back in 8th grade, he was that quiet kid who got shoved into lockers and stuttered when he read aloud. The only thing I remembered more clearly than his nervous voice was the day I handed him my jacket in the middle of a downpour. He'd forgotten his, and taken mine off without thinking. That was just who I used to be. At 2:14 a.m., I hit call. When I arrived at his apartment, a one-bedroom above an old bakery near downtown, I hesitated at the door. He opened it on the second knock. He looked older, of course he did, but his eyes hadn't changed. Still soft, still cautious. He took one look at me, wet, exhausted, bag slung over my shoulder, and didn't ask anything. Just nodded and stepped aside. He handed me a hoodie as I walked in. It was faded blue, worn thin at the elbows. "You gave me yours back in middle school," he said. "That year, I had nothing. So I guess it's my turn." I didn't cry. I just nodded and held the fabric close, the same way you might hold a memory you're not sure is real. Thane pointed toward the couch. "It folds out if you want, or just crash as is." For the first time since I left my parents' house, I felt human. Not invisible, not extra, just seen. The days that followed were quiet in the best way. Thane lived simply, no clutter, no noise. He worked remote doing freelance tech support, fixed things around the building for a rent discount, brewed strong coffee, and never pried. One afternoon, I noticed him frustrated over a spreadsheet for billing. I offered to help. He laughed at first, but when I cleaned up the formulas, added logic, and made the dashboard intuitive, he stared at me like it turned water into wine. "You ever think about doing this again?" he asked. I didn't answer. Not out loud. That evening, while he cooked rice and eggs, we sat at the table, plates half full, silence stretching comfortably between us. "You know," he said, "when I was a kid, I thought disappearing would hurt less than being ignored." I looked at him and whispered, "Maybe it does. But it's still disappearing." He nodded slowly, then added, "You're not erased. You just got wiped clean enough to rewrite." That sentence didn't hit like a punch. It was softer, like a door creaking open after years of rust. When he went to bed, I pulled my ancient laptop from my bag. It took 10 minutes just to boot up, but the screen still glowed, barely, like it remembered who I used to be. I opened tabs, checked email, applied for 3 gigs writing, formatting, transcription. Nothing fancy, just the basics, something, anything. Then I clicked on a link for foreclosed property auctions. I wasn't sure why. Maybe because I was tired of being at someone else's mercy. Maybe because if I ever got a foothold, I needed a place to stand. Scrolling through the listings, most were too far, too big, too broken, until one address stopped me cold. I stared at it, blinking hard. It was theirs, the building my parents lived in, the one I grew up seeing as solid, permanent, unshakable, now listed. Auction scheduled in 3 weeks. Starting bid, reasonable. Status, distressed. I stared at the screen for a long time, hands still, heart suddenly loud. That's their building. I didn't wake up plotting revenge. I didn't sharpen knives in the dark or dream up grand speeches. I just wanted answers. A thread of truth to pull from the tangled web my family had wrapped around me. But sometimes, life hands you a match when you're already standing in gasoline. It was a gray Thursday afternoon, the kind where even the sky seemed unsure of itself. I sat curled up on a corner cushion in Thane's apartment, my knees pulled to my chest, the soft hum of his old coffee maker the only sound grounding me to the moment. The smell of overbrewed espresso lingered in the air as I stared at the flickering screen of my dying laptop. The power cord wobbled in the port, threatening to give out, but that stubborn machine held on, like it still had something left to say. And it did. The auction site blinked back at mean old listing I'd found at midnight the night before. I had clicked out of curiosity. I stayed because of disbelief. There it was. A familiar address. 112 East Sable Street. A 6-unit building. A place I'd known my whole life. Our old family property. Listed as distressed. But that wasn't the punch. The real blow came from the name sitting under current ownership. Velcor Realty. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. A fluke. Just another faceless company scooping up leftovers from the housing crisis. But the name, it scratched at something in me, like a forgotten melody. Velcor. I opened a new browser tab. My fingers moved before my brain could catch up. Property tax portals, business registration records, digital receipts. I was on autopilot, chasing a shadow. It didn't take long. Velcor was a shell company. Its P.O. box? The same one Mom used during her cupcake empire phase, right after Callista left for college. I remember helping her design labels for the boxes. The business died in 6 weeks, but apparently she kept the LLC alive just in case. And now, apparently, just in case included mortgaging the only real asset our family had left. There it was, in black and white. Valora C. Harmon, registered agent, my mother. And then I found the mortgage documents, signed by her, in full. Same loopy V I used to copy when forging her name for school permission slips. My stomach dropped when I saw the payment history. Missed deadlines, stacked up penalties, red-lettered notices from the bank. Then the kicker, a formal default, dated just 2 weeks ago. The building wasn't just up for auction, it was teetering on the edge of being swallowed whole. I leaned back, breath catching like something was stuck in my chest. It wasn't sadness, not grief. It was something heavier, like a betrayal so layered it had no name. Valora had mortgaged the property, behind everyone's back. No family meeting, no signature from Dad, not even a whisper to me. All those years she preached about stability, about me being irresponsible, ungrateful, unstable. Meanwhile, she was using a dead cupcake dream to quietly gamble away the roof over our heads. And Dorian, my father. He hadn't said a word. Instead of speaking up, he gave me an envelope and let me go. I thought it was cruelty. Now, I wondered if it was shame. Thane re-entered the room just as I was blinking away whatever storm was brewing behind my eyes. "You okay?" he asked gently. I closed the laptop with a click that sounded louder than it should have. "Define okay," I said flatly. He didn't push, just slid a mug across the table toward me like it was a lifeline. Want sugar? No, I muttered, still staring into the void. I want a lawyer. That got his attention. He didn't ask questions, just nodded once, and by that evening, we were seated across from one of his old college friends, real estate attorney who specialized in small LLCs and foreclosure flips, the kind of guy who didn't care about your past, just your paperwork. He slid over a stack of forms. You want to form an investment entity? He asked. You just need to name it and sign. Name it. I could have called it Payback Partners. I could have called it Don't Bet Against Me, Inc. I could have made it loud, bitter, scathing. Instead, I paused, then wrote 3 letters. ISL Holdings. My name, my initials. Something simple, something mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ownership not just of the company, but of myself. I signed, submitted, and bookmarked the auction date, 17 days. That was the countdown. But make no mistake, this wasn't about saving them. I wasn't coming in like some estranged daughter-turned-hero. This wasn't a rescue mission. It was a reclamation. They'd pushed me out, erased me from their story, handed my seat at the table to someone else, and smiled while doing it. Fine. Let them toast to my absence. But they never stopped to ask what it'd take with me when I left. And they were about to find out. They thought they erased me. But I was already building my return. The LLC paperwork came through a few days later. I walked to the local legal aid office tucked between a payday loan store and a dusty insurance agency. It wasn't fancy, but the man behind the desk had kind eyes and didn't ask unnecessary questions. He helped me finalize the forms. When it came time to sign, I slowed down. Not out of hesitation, but because I wanted to feel each letter take shape easily. My name. Mine, not borrowed, not cropped out, not whispered through someone else's mouth. The ink soaked into the page like I was carving myself back into existence. Later that night, I opened my old hard drive. It had survived 3 moves, 1 hard drop, and a thunderstorm. I was hunting for financial records I could use for freelance applications. What I found instead made me stop breathing. It was a Word document titled Statement to See. I clicked it, already knowing what it was. Back in my early 20s, Callista had asked for help with an MBA scholarship essay, said she needed a little polish. I'd written it for her from scratch 3 hours straight, heart and all. It was personal, about carrying a family through struggle, about being the silent foundation. I highlighted a line I remembered writing. Some daughters are born to shine. Others are built to carry weight in silence. Then I Googled it. There it was. On Callista's blog, front and center, how I became my family's backbone. She hadn't changed a word. That was mine. Not just the phrasing, the experience. She took the words I bled into for her future and pasted her name over them like a signature on a stolen painting. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I stared at the screen for a long time, the kind of stare that strips the color out of things. I'd thought we had a bond back then, that maybe she saw me, even if Mom and Dad didn't. Turns out, she saw me the way some people see good wallpaper decorative, useful, forgettable. The next morning, I walked a slow loop around the block near the motel. Stores with names etched on glass. People who claimed their little corner of the world. I hadn't done that. I'd moved through life like a draft through an open window, present, but never asked to stay. That afternoon, I attended a public zoning meeting at City Hall. I was there to understand more about foreclosure auctions, how notices went out, how bids were recorded. I sat in the back, unnoticed. Until I wasn't. A man 2 rows over leaned toward me after the meeting ended. Late 60s, plaid shirt, clean-shaven but tired around the eyes. You're Valoris girl, aren't you? I froze. Thought so. You've got her edge, he said, voice low but firm. But none of her ice. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. He offered a small smile. If you're here for the Sable Street building, good. That place needs new blood. Been rotten under the surface too long. I didn't explain myself, didn't offer a backstory or context, just nodded. It was the first time in weeks someone connected me to my family, without praise or pity, just truth. Walking back to Thane's apartment, I kept thinking about that. The way people outside your story can still see the real chapters. He saw something. Not my wounds, but my shape. That night, I opened a blank Word document, titled it ISL Holdings Purpose Statement, and I began to write. Not for them. For me. They used my words. Now I use my voice. They spent years pushing me out, pretending I wasn't part of anything they built, anything they shared. But the thing about being invisible for so long, you learn how to move quietly, strategically, and when it was finally my turn to act, I didn't need noise. I needed results. The auction wasn't cinematic, no gavel, no frantic bidding war. Just a login screen, a coffee cup, and my laptop on a Tuesday morning. A few mild offers came in, barely serious. Then, ISL Holdings submitted the final bid. Strong. Unshakable. The moment I saw the words, "You won," pop up in bold on the screen, I didn't grin. I didn't clap or text anyone. I simply whispered to the air of my quiet kitchen, I don't need applause. I just need the deed. By noon, I had already drafted the new notices, rent adjustments, maintenance expectations, late fee schedules, all within regulation, all enforceable. The documents were cold, fair, and effective. No emotional language, just numbers. But for one unit, Unit 4B, Valora and Dorian's apartment, the rent would rise by 213%. That number wasn't random. It came from spreadsheets, repair logs, missed payments, and a history of entitled comfort subsidized by family loyalty. Loyalty that apparently had a one-way expiration. Some might call it revenge. I call it balance. The property manager I hired was sharp and discreet. She had no idea I had lived in that building as a child, had memories in its stairwell, or had once fixed the porch light myself when Dad didn't have the time. She only knew that ISL Holdings paid its invoices on time, filed its documents early, and followed every city code to the letter. That's how I wanted it. No drama, just business. The first tremor arrived via text Callista, of course, stirring the pot in the old family group chat like we were still pretending to be whole. Who jacked the rent this high? Valora's freaking out. What even is this? Seconds later, Valora chimed in. This new landlord is a monster. No warning, no notice. Typical, no soul. Dorian stayed silent. So did I. Later that day, I tried logging into our old family Dropbox where Mom used to store scanned W-2s, birth certificates, insurance docs. It gave me a clean rejection. Access denied. I checked the logs. My email had been removed. No alert. No message. I wasn't just being cut off. I was being erased. Out of caution, I called the bank where Dad opened a joint savings account in my name when I was 14. I'd left it untouched for years, out of respect. It was closed 6 weeks ago, the rep told me. No letter, no courtesy call. Just gone. I hung up, sat in silence, let the fact sink in, not just that they had shut doors, but that they were redoing the blueprints to a house that no longer included me. But this time, I didn't collapse. Instead, I double-checked the tenant list, reviewed the upcoming repair timelines, noticed that the heating ducts in Unit 2C were overdue for cleaning. I sent a note to the maintenance team. Then I opened my inbox and signed off on the insurance renewal for the building. I didn't cry. I clicked. They could pretend I didn't exist. I could prove I did through deeds, through signatures, through paper trails and tax filings. They had one narrative. I had the receipts. 3 days later, a message landed in the tenant portal. The subject line was blunt. Appeal. Rent increase urgent. It read, "We've lived here for over a decade, never missed a payment. This is unfair, excessive, and honestly cruel. Who does this to people they know?" It was signed by Valora. I stared at it. No guilt, no rush of satisfaction either. Just a steady understanding. This was the price of rewriting someone else's story. I forwarded the email to the manager with one note. Respond per lease clause C. No exceptions. I didn't owe them an explanation. I had already spoken through contracts, through structure, through silence. That night, I drove by the property. Just once. I didn't stop. Just circled the block and looked. The porch light was still flickering. It used to be mine to fix. I remember being 13, climbing up on a chair with a new bulb in hand, just trying to be helpful, hoping someone would notice. No one ever did. Now, the porch light still blinked, but on my property. Under my name. Paid for by someone they said wasn't worthy of having anything. They built walls to shut me out. I turned them into doors. And walked right through. But when you open a door they thought was locked, they don't just panic, they attack. I woke up to 5 text messages. 2 from former classmates. 1 from an old family friend. The last 2 from people I hadn't heard from in years. Hey, you okay? What's going on with your mom's post? I clicked open Facebook not because I cared what Valora posted, but because I already knew it would be about me. There it was. A sepia-toned family photo from a summer picnic years ago. The caption read, "Some children choose greed over blood. Some betray their own. We gave everything. They gave us paperwork. I was in the photo. Or I had been. Now my face had been cropped just enough that only the curve of my elbow made it in. The illusion of family, staged perfectly. The comments were full of sympathy, Bible verses, the usual Midwestern pity parade. A few cousins chimed in. So sorry, Aunt Valora. You did everything you could. One even asked if it joined a cult. Callista messaged me directly. What did you do? I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The truth didn't belong in a thread full of hand-clapping emojis and self-righteous grief. I took a screenshot, then blocked Valora. A few days passed. Then came the formal email from Callista. We're hosting a retirement dinner for Dad. HOA requires all tenants to attend, including new ownership. You'll need to be present. It wasn't an invitation. It was bait. I accepted. The evening of the dinner, I wore a blazer-nothing, flashy, just clean, structured. I tied my hair back, clipped a badge with ISL Holdings on it to my lapel, and carried a slim clipboard. I didn't knock when I entered the community hall. I didn't need to. The room quieted the second I walked in. Valora didn't recognize me right away. Dorian glanced up, then looked back down. Callista paled. I took my seat at the end of the row, across from them, but never once looking their way. The HOA manager stood to speak. Thank you all for coming. Before we begin the celebratory portion of the evening, we'd like to introduce the new owner of the building, who is present for any tenant questions. I stood. My name is Isleen Harmon. I represent ISL Holdings, the managing company of the property. Lease terms have been updated across all units. Market rates apply to everyone equally. There will be no exceptions. Thank you. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My eyes landed briefly on Valora. Then I sat. No one clapped. No one breathed. The rest of the dinner was a quiet horror show. Valora clutched her fork like it might shatter. Dorian pretended to read the program over and over. Callista smiled too much, too tightly. I didn't stay for dessert. As I walked out, I passed the photo display set up near the door. Family memories, school ribbons, black and white shots of our grandparents. My photo was missing, of course, but I noticed one space with a thumbtack and no frame. I stopped in front of it for just a moment. Not to mourn, just to note the vacancy. That night, as I settled into my apartment, I checked Facebook again. Valora had posted again. Some doors open both ways, but not all exits lead to mercy. The likes were fewer this time. A few comments. One person asked if she was okay. The post smelled of desperation, wrapped in poetry. I didn't comment. I didn't share. I just stared at it for a moment and whispered, let them talk. I own the room they whisper in. The truth has a strange rhythm. It starts as a whisper, just low enough to ignore, but it grows. And eventually, if you don't listen, it walks right up to your front door. It was a gray Tuesday late afternoon. The kind of day where the light feels heavy, like it's struggling to make it through the clouds. I was folding laundry when I heard the knock. Not a polite tap, not urgent, just hesitant, like whoever was on the other side wasn't sure they should be there. I opened it, and there stood Amanda. Her presence was disarming. She looked smaller, somehow, her eyes tired, makeup barely hanging on like it had been brushed on over a restless night, or maybe even tears. Her hair was pulled back in that high-tension ponytail she always wore when trying to control something that wouldn't behave. "I'm not here to make peace," she said before I could speak. I have to ask you something, and I want the truth this time." I stepped back, motioned her in. She walked inside like someone entering a courtroom they never agreed to be summoned to. Careful, defensive, braced for judgment. She didn't sit, just opened her bag and pulled out a worn manila folder. She set it on the table between us like it was a shared burden. "It was in the HOA folder," she said, voice tight. "I found it while helping Mom sort through the renewal packet. She doesn't even know I kept this copy." She opened the folder herself. I hadn't moved. The first page was a printed PDF spreadsheet formatting, black ink on ivory. Cold, clinical. At the bottom right, Valora's signature stamped neatly in digital cursive. Above it, a budget breakdown labeled Projected Household Expenses, Year 29. She pointed to one line in particular, Eliza Dependent Expenses, $18,230. Amanda tapped her nail on my name. "She listed you," she said quietly, "like you were a subscription. Therapy, utilities, food. Like you were a recurring charge she forgot to cancel." I stared at the paper, then at Amanda, but said nothing. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been buried beneath years of denial. "I always thought Mom exaggerated about you," she admitted, voice shaking. "But I didn't think it was this cruel. I didn't think she was capable of reducing you to a number." The silence between us stretched long, held only by the hum of the ceiling fan. Like even it wasn't sure what to say. Amanda finally sat down. "I should have known," she murmured, more to herself than to me. "Back when she wouldn't let you give a speech at Dad's retirement dinner, or when she blamed you for the missed mortgage check when it was actually mine." I kept making excuses for her because it was easier than looking at what she really was doing. She pulled out another document. This one was a lease agreement. She slid it toward me. I leaned in. There it was, my name. In the section labeled Property Ownership Transfer, ISL Holdings, under the LLC's parent authorization. My name, clear as day, in the signature field. Dated. Signed. Sealed. Amanda blinked hard. "You were the only one who never asked for credit," she whispered. "That's how I should have known it was you. You never needed the spotlight, just a little space to be." I got up and poured 2 cups of tea. It was stale, borderline cold, but neither of us cared. We sat there, hands around mugs that didn't warm us much. No cheers, no apologies, just quiet. For once, no one interrupted. No one talked over me. We just listened. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Amanda finally said. Her voice was flat but brittle, like a glass already cracked down the middle. "I don't expect to forget," I said, stirring sugar into my tea. "But I'm done setting fire to things just to prove I was cold." Amanda nodded. There was no grand emotional collapse, no hug, no promises. Just 2 sisters breathing in a space that finally had room for both of us. As she picked up her folder and made for the door, she hesitated. "You were never the extra mouth," she said. She just didn't know how to handle more than one voice in the room. I walked her out. We didn't hug. We didn't exchange any well-talk soon. But I did give her something before she left. "Next time," I said gently, "knock with truth, not fear." When the door closed behind her, I stood for a long time. Then I went back to the table, reopened that first PDF, and highlighted my name. It was just black ink on a page. But that line, that expense label, they'd spent years trying to bury me under it. I opened another file on my computer, my draft will. It wasn't complete yet. But one clause had just become crystal clear. To be seen is not a favor granted by others. It is a right I reclaim quietly, permanently, and without apology. I didn't need revenge. I needed space to breathe, so I built it, inch by inch, in my own name. The letter arrived on a gray Wednesday morning. It wasn't stamped. No return address, no tracking code. Just a plain white envelope slipped carefully through the mail slot. Like whoever delivered it didn't want to be seen, but still needed to be heard. That told me everything. I knew the handwriting before I even opened it. Slanted cursive, almost too neat. She'd always taken pride in her penmanship, as if forming perfect letters somehow proved she was a good person. I unfolded it slowly. 3 lines written like a sigh. You never really said what you needed. Maybe we assumed too much. You could have spoken up sooner. That was it. No apology, no ownership, no reflection, really. Just a gentle push of blame dressed up like empathy. I read it once, then folded it back, sealed it in the envelope, and placed it in the bottom drawer with old phone chargers and expired coupons. I didn't need to reread it. I'd memorized that pattern years ago. That kind of silence, the kind used like a scalpel, had always been her specialty. I didn't write back. Instead, I picked up the keys to my building, the ones with the red ribbon I tied on, just after closing, and walked the hallways like a woman who finally owned her air. On the 2nd floor, Mrs. Ellison was outside her apartment, crouched over a crate of soil and ceramic pots. "Lavender," she said, offering me one with soft petals and rich earth. "It helps things grow, and it keeps the bitterness away." I thanked her, carried it down to the lobby, and placed it near the window, where the light could touch it in the afternoons. Then I climbed the stairs back to my apartment, each step an act of returning to myself. A few days later, I walked to the community center for a local event, Legacy of Our Neighborhood. I hadn't planned to go, but something about the word legacy made me curious. Who exactly did they think helped build this neighborhood? Who did they still pretend never existed? Inside, photo collages lined the walls. Snapshots of old storefronts, parades, block parties, graduations, and baby showers. Generations framed in laughter and sepia tones. And then, there it was, tucked in the lower left of a family collage. A photo from over 2 decades ago. My parents stood at the front porch of our old house, looking young and sure of themselves. Between them stood a little girl with crooked bangs and untied shoes. You could barely see her, half her body cut off at the frame's edge. No label, no name. I looked at it for a long time, not with pain, with recognition. They'd always edited me out, even in the photos they displayed. I wasn't part of their picture. Not really. I left without saying anything. Didn't need to. That night, I went home, opened the bottom drawer of my dresser, and found the only childhood photo I had kept. Me, age 6. Knees scraped, holding a garden hose in my lap like it was a trophy. I stared at it, thinking about the little girl I used to be with, one who tried so hard to be enough for people who only saw her when she was useful. Then I walked into the kitchen, lit the small incense bowl I kept beside the window, and gently placed the photo inside. It curled, blackened, and disappeared into smoke. Not out of anger, out of peace. I wasn't her anymore. Not the little girl waiting to be invited. Not the young woman holding her breath, hoping the next family dinner wouldn't hurt as much as the last. I finalized my will the next morning. Half of everything I had savings, stocks, my condo would go to a fund for women leaving controlling or emotionally abusive homes. I named it after my mother's maiden name, because sometimes irony is the sweetest form of clarity. On the last page, under Purpose Statement, I wrote, "For the ones they called extra." Later that evening, I recorded a short message for the scholarship archive I'd helped fund over the years. No makeup. Just me, sitting at my desk, speaking with the kind of calm that only comes after surviving silence. They edited me out of their story, so I wrote my own. If you're watching this, maybe you need to do the same. I didn't cry, I didn't smile. Just closed the laptop and let the moment settle. That weekend, I passed the old house again. The windows were lit from inside. Laughter from the backyard. Children's voices. Maybe theirs. Maybe someone else's. I didn't slow down. Just walked past. Breezed by like the ghost they once made me feel like. Then I whispered to the wind, I forgive you. Not for them. For me. Because healing isn't about getting even. It's about walking away and not looking back. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one building the foundation beneath everyone else's feet. You can be erased from a photo, cut out of a family story, even written off on paper, and still write yourself back in. With your own pen, in your own words. I used to believe forgiveness had to be earned with apologies. But I've come to understand. Forgiveness is something you give yourself when you're ready to stop carrying the weight of people who never truly lifted you. Now I'd like to ask you, have you ever been made to feel like the extra mouth, the one who didn't belong? What did you do with that pain? Did you fight back? Did you grow from it? Or are you still carrying it quietly? If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear where you're watching from. Drop a 1 in the comments if it touched something real inside you. Or tell me your city. Let's make this a space for voices that were once silenced. And if this video didn't connect with you, I respect that too. Let me know why and where you're tuning in from. I believe in learning through listening. If you'd like to hear more true stories like this, about quiet strength, resilience, and reclaiming your place in the world, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. You never know when the next story might feel a little like your own.